We can go.
So hello and good morning, and a very warm welcome to the last session of the Stream Around the Clock conference, We Needed Change, organized by FORMWELT Institute in cooperation with Leanbase. This morning's topic will be an interesting and exciting one, actually, to close our 48 hours of streaming with leadership in crisis. So what is We Needed Change all about? And I will share a few slides with you to give you a first impression. Actually, the idea behind the conference We Needed Change is to bring 4 currents of our time together, which are out there. First of all, the systemic society perspective, climate and sustainability, transhumanism, and new leadership and new economy to enable dialogue, exchange, and in the future, joint actions for a better tomorrow. FORMWELT Institute, whose founder is Gitta, Peyn, and who is behind the conference, is an institute which aims to promote specialized, renewing, innovative research projects and applications within and from the field of humanities system theory and scientific mathematical theory of complex systems. The main focus and central motive of the work of FORMWELT Institute is to develop and construct bridges in space and time, in communication and mind, to carry both science and humanities into the future, to evaluate achievements effectively, to critically analyze what needs to be provided and shape the world in an active cooperation. If you would like to find out more about FORMWELT Institute, please visit the webpage that we have displayed here. And this also gives me the opportunity to introduce ourselves as your facilitators today. And first of all, I would like to hand over to Kristin to share a few words.
Thank you very much, Rebekka. So, my name is Kristin Eissfeldt, and I'm more than happy to be part of this conference and act as organizational right-hand woman with Gitta and FORMWELT Institute in general. With over 20 years of background in HR and now focused on self-reflection, authenticity, and human emancipation, I met Gitta last year and resonated immediately with her ideas to face world's challenges via communication. So I urgently want to join there. Thank you, Rebekka. It's up to you now.
Thank you, and good morning from my end as well. I'm Rebekka Manos. I'm actually facilitator and coach for leadership, transformation, and mindfulness. And I came across Gitta's work by accident, and I must just say I was so impressed by her work and also by her determination to change the world and make it a better place, that it was a no-brainer for me when she asked me to join the conference as a facilitator, because I believe it's a great opportunity to also, yes, bring a little bit of my energy into this strive for a better world. So it's an honor for me to be here today. And it's an honor also to share the space with our guests today. And let me just give you a short introduction to our structure that we will have for this session today. So after our welcome, we will introduce our guests. That will be Kristin, who will be taking care of that. And then we will start with the keynote by Jan. It will be about 15 to 20 minutes. And afterwards, we will have a moment where we will call all the guests for their statements. And as we are an organized place here, in alphabetical order by last name. So each one of you will get 5 to 10 minutes to lay out your thoughts, to also share a few slides if you want to, in regards to the topic. Afterwards, we will take a short comfort break, and then it will be all up to you for an open dialogue, and where we will also be taking in questions from the YouTube channel audience, who has been quite active over the last days as well, and which we appreciate very much. During the open dialogue, Kristin and I will make sure that each one of you get their time and space to speak and to talk to each other, and to ensure that we have, yes, a fruitful conversation there. So with that, I would like to hand over to Jan to start with his keynote.
Yeah, thank you so much to Rebekka for the warm welcome, and also thank you very much for Kristin for the invitation. And I know how much effort there is behind of running and organizing such a conference like you just did. So I very much appreciate this is the last session, and I could imagine after that long marathon you are really looking forward to.
It's a real pleasure, Jan. I just have to interrupt for a second because I think we should do the introduction of all our guests first before you start with the keynote. Otherwise, nobody knows who you are, Jan. Okay.
Absolutely. So that is sometimes what happens when you do it for the 10th time. You interrupt the whole structure that you have put up before. Thank you so much for reminding Kristin, and up to you to introduce our wonderful guests.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for me. Thank you. So I start with Jan, who is our keynote speaker this morning. Jan Bellermann is an international speaker, consultant, and trainer. He supports leaders, teams, and organizations in growing their consciousness, because consciousness is the most effective catalyst for transformation. That's where we met Jan and myself a few years ago. The results are purpose-driven, people-oriented, high-performance cultures. Jan managed to combine a human management style with sustainable professional success. In order to pass on these insights to as many people as possible, he developed the conscious leadership approach with Regina Brand. And they also organized last year's European Conscious Capitalism Conference in Berlin. So we are looking forward to your keynote. Welcome, Jan. And before you start, I introduce all the others as well, and then everybody knows who we are talking to this morning. I continue in alphabetical order with Regina. Regina Brand is the co-founder and managing partner of the Conscious Leadership Academy and an executive master in consulting and coaching for change from INSEAD Business School. During a meditation retreat in India, she discovered her passion to empower people to transform and transition from the corporate world to her own purpose-driven business. Regina is an advocate of bridges transition work and help leaders not only to get their people through the crisis, but to capitalize on it by transforming the way how people work and who they need to become to thrive in the newly emerging reality. We will hear more about that later. Appreciate very much having you here, Regina. So the next in my list is our Larry King of the Singularity in his fourth panel today, Nikola. Nikola is an author, futurist, and speaker. His Conversations with the Future is an international bestseller, and his podcast Singularity FM is amazingly successful. Nikola, who chose Canada as the place to be with his wife, triggers questions instead of answers, like, what if your toothbrush gets smarter than you? That's the one I loved most from your profile. And I picked up yesterday, he pleads that only by wisdom and ethics we can get to where we actually want to. So, Alina, you're the next. Alina Grün, she works as an international project manager of Collective Leadership Institute. She's the expert for building collective leadership competencies and promoting dialogue in Eastern Europe. Her actual projects, first developing of cross-sectoral dialogue in the project Citizen Engagement for Good Governance, Accountability and Rule of Law in Laos, and in the project Platform for Civil Society Dialogue with a focus on increasing collective leadership competencies and dialogic skills between NGOs working in the social sector in Belarus and Russia. She's an expert in the conceptual development of teaching modules such as leadership, change management, and business ethics. Warm welcome, Alina.
Good morning.
Next is Marc. And Marc, he holds a variety of functions. Professor of Media, Economic and Business Psychology at University for Media, Communication and Economics, Executive Board Member of the European Society for Research in Adult Development, Member of the Editorial Board of the Integral Review, a transdisciplinary and transcultural journal for new thought, research, and praxis. His main interests are in the integration of such diverse fields as adult development, leadership, organizational trauma prevention, and crisis management, as well as arts-inspired qualitative research and meta-theorizing. Great to have you here, Marc. And last but not least, there's Heiko. Heiko is a self-employed solitaire, holds space and creates containers for change and transformation processes in organizations and individuals. He's the author of the Practical Handbook, Praxishandbuch Integrale Organisationsentwicklung, Integral Organization Development. The current state of the world is too complex for easy answers, and it is even too complex for the simple questions, he said. Maybe, Heiko, this was also a reason for starting with studies in FORMWELT and Weltform. Warm welcome, Heiko.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Kristin, for introducing our guests. It's absolutely wonderful to have you all here. And now, as I have already been so excited about it, finally I may hand over to Jan for the keynote. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebekka. And I love that this is the human part. We all make mistakes, and that's why it feels so alive. Good. Let me share some slides first. Okay. So,
thank you.
Good. Yeah, thank you, sir, very much. It's really an honor for me to speak about this wonderful topic, leadership in crisis. And when I was asked to talk about this, I was thinking about it, and it triggered two questions in me. And one was, do we have a leadership crisis? And the second is how do we lead through this crisis? So first, I would love to explore a little bit if we have a leadership crisis. And therefore, let's dive into the achievements of our leaders in the past decades. And this slide is showing, I need to move you first. So this slide is showing the growth from the 60s to today of the world real GDP. So what we have seen that our leaders have created a lot of profit and wealth and increased it by 8 times in this time. So I think definitely that's a great achievement, and we can say that our leaders created a lot of wealth and profit there. The question is now, who benefits from this wealth? And when I started to look into it, I found interesting enough that 44% of this wealth are owned by just 1% of the adult population on this planet. And if we take even the second group into account, and both together, 80% are owned by just 10% of the population. And if we now jump to the bottom, we would say that almost 60% of the population just own 1.7% of this wealth. So for me, this is a real time bomb for social rights. If we then look into it, how many resources we needed to create that kind of wealth, and if we just imagine that if all people on this planet would live like the people in the US, we would need 5 Earths to live that way. I think in Europe we are not just very much better, it's also 3 times for Germany, 2.9 for Switzerland, and so on. So we also take a lot more than the Earth can renew, and in average for the whole world it's 1.7 times. And this is very clear for everyone that we cannot continue this way. because we are taking a lot more than the Earth can renew. And if we then look into what's the impact on the humanity and the wildlife, then we find interesting facts like we have 4 million people who die every year through air pollution, and that's just air pollution. We have 9 million people dying of hunger every year. And we have a new disease coming over humanity, and that's depression, because we have 264 million people, and that's just the registered ones, every year for depression. And if the depression gets worse, then people start to commit suicide. And we have 20 million attempts of committing suicide per year, and at least 1 million people succeed. And if we then take it into the wildlife, we can say that 80% of our natural forests are gone, that 90% of the large mammals are gone, that 95% of large fishes are gone. So we can definitely say the way in which we produce this kind of wealth is a very unhealthy one. And if we then take into account the climate crisis, which will definitely come, we can say the past solutions have become the new challenges. But let me be very clear. The problem is not that most leaders focus on making profits. I think it's very clear, if you run a company, you need to make profits, because otherwise, after a short while, you will be out of business. From my perspective, the problem is that most leaders regard economy, society, and environment as 3 separate systems. And let's look into that. The economy is mainly serving the shareholders, the business leaders. The political leaders are focusing on the society, and everybody expects that the main activists are looking after the environment. But if we then look into it, that the business is really at the heart of our society. So the business needs skilled people to run properly, and the people need work to survive. And all need to be part of a healthy environment, which feeds us with renewable resources. And the idea here is that we have one complex interdependent system instead of 3 different ones. And what is necessary here for us is to come to an integral worldview. That means that we shift from an I-centric worldview to a we-centric worldview. And for me, this is really, today I would say that most leaders aspire to be the best in the world. But what we want to see is now, and what we need to see is that we have leaders who aspire to be the best for the world. And that means they need to think in complex systems. If we then look into the capability of our leaders, how much they are able to handle complexity and to live and lead their organization through an unpredictable and complex world, which we call the VUCA world. And this is a company in the US who were really looking into and assessing thousands of leaders across all the management levels. And what they did is, the blue bars are demonstrating the capability which the people bring in these different management levels. And the red bars represent the requirements of the job, how much complexity you need to handle there. And what we see here is, especially for the executives one, there's a huge gap. And that's what we call the complexity gap. So if you then look into other research, how many leaders do we have who really can handle these mental, emotional, and social capabilities to successfully lead through complex system changes, we only then find 5 to 7% of these leaders. So if you are in an organization and you have one of these leaders, you need to keep them under all circumstances because these guys are really rarely spread. So after all what we have just seen now, I would simply say, yes, we have a leadership crisis, and I think we have a very serious one. The big question now is, how do we lead through this crisis? And here I would love to start with our friend Albert Einstein, and I'm sure you all have read this quote before, where he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And I think everybody agrees. The big question is then, how do we think in a different way? How do we get there? And therefore, I would like to explain a little bit about the principles of transformation we use in our academy. And let's say a transformation is something that is producing different results, and hopefully different results. The different results are the ones that you are expecting to see. To achieve different results, you need to perform different actions. And to perform different actions, you need to perform different decisions. And to arrive at different decisions, you need to have a different mindset. And to have a different mindset, here Albert Einstein comes, we need to have different thoughts. But now the big question is, where do your thoughts come from? Where do all your ideas come from? And that's consciousness. It all comes from consciousness. And if we look into why 70% or even more of all transformation programs are failing, it's mainly because everybody's focusing on the actions. Our leaders are really good in the upper part in performing actions, creating task forces, and implement this. But as long as we are not addressing the root cause, in this case, the consciousness of which you are operating from, you're always just accelerating from the same mindset, from the same thinking. You're just speeding up and getting more efficient, but you're not changing the way you are doing the business. So it's really crucial to understand that it's most important which consciousness state you are operating from. And without going now into the details, because that's a longer thing, let me say to you, we strongly believe that there are only two consciousness states. One is a stress stage, in which you suffer from frustration, fear, anger, confusion, and so on. And the other is a state of well-being, in which you feel calm and joyful and happy, or love, and so on. And to understand the differences, why this is now so important, we jump and have a short look into our brain. So we have three brain areas which we need to currently look at. One is the prefrontal cortex. This is the home of our rational intellect. The empathy sits there, the meaning making. We have the limbic system, which looks after, is responsible for the emotions. And then we have the first and the oldest part, the first part, which develops when we are growing up. It's the so-called reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain ensures that we are surviving. And it's mainly based on automatic responses and fast reflexes. So it makes sure that we are surviving and that we are doing good in the fight and flight mode. And now to understand what this all means, the consciousness states, what this means for our brains, there was a there are some researchers in London which created a game, and our brain is not distinguishing between a game and reality. So these people, when they scan the brains of the players, and these have been focusing on their winning strategies, and they are doing good during the game, they feel in a well-being state. And you can see the red part of the energy is at the front part, the prefrontal cortex, all the intelligence is activated there. But if then suddenly the pressure comes up and they fear to lose their lives in this game, our brain reacts like it is a real threat. And all the energy shifts back to the reptile brain. And you see, we are on automation mode, on autopilot. This is simply based on instincts. And exactly at the time when we need our intelligence most, unfortunately, we don't have much access to it. And this is the reason why we need to learn to think and find out from which consciousness state we are operating from. And this is, I think, if we take the example, most of us, I think we already experienced already the quality of the decisions we made when we were in panic or when we had a high level of fear. I think everybody knows that. And this is exactly the reason why these 5% of the guys who are really able to lead successfully through the complexity and come up with different sustainable solutions, they operate on 4 layers. One is, of course, the layer what you do. Of course, you need your business strategy, your objectives and goals. And then the second layer, you have the how, you have your tools, your systems, your processes. And then in level 3, you have the why. This is what Simon Sinek made so famous, where all the energy comes from, which boosts the levels up front. So you have a vision, a purpose, and a meaning in what you do there. But the root cause of all this, the source of the thoughts and ideas, is exactly the layer 4. This is which consciousness state you are operating from. And because this source of your thoughts and ideas determines your mindset and the quality of the decisions you are taking there. And then finally, the success of your actions. So what we can say is, to evolve into a more integral consciousness, it takes time and practice. And this learning process is called vertical development. This is something that we do at our academy, but this is a topic in itself. And I think it's a lot more beneficial for us now to get a little bit more practical, so that with what you just learned, that you have something to take away. And I would like you to discover the first lesson of this conscious leaders. And the conscious leadership lesson number 1 is, it consists of 2 steps. One is first become aware of which consciousness state you mainly operate from. And the second part is learn how to shift from a stress to a well-being state. And what we often use here is this exercise. It's a very simple exercise. You take a blank sheet of paper, you draw a line in the middle, and on the left side, you count the stress states, and then the right side, you call the well-being state. And what you then do is, across the day, you pause and reflect from which state you operate, and then you count and do your exercise. What is helpful here is that you, for example, use a timer which reminds you to pause, because normally we are so busy that we don't do that. And there are nice apps out there which you can install, and it just reminds you to stop and reflect. Or in my case, what I did very often, every time when the phone was ringing, before I picked it up, I really checked in which state I was. But let me be very clear. One of the big hurdles here from the people is that they say, oh, I'm in a neutral state. Let me be very clear, there is no neutral state. Our body cells only have a growth state and a protection state. There is nothing in between. And that's the same for this consciousness. You are either in stress state or in well-being state. So if you cannot define in which state you are, and you think you are neutral, the neutral one belongs to the stress part, because you definitely know if you're feeling well or not. I think that's clear. And then you will be surprised, or for example, you just watch yourself, what happens to you when you're watching the news in the evening. In what state are you when you're watching the news? And then the last slide here I have is, how do we shift the state? And this is an exercise I learned at the O&O Academy in India, and it's an exercise that's really working within 3 minutes. Of course, it takes a little bit of practice, but I would simply say, let's just do it and just walk through it. If you have the interest, I simply request that you close your eyes and you sit still with your spine erect. And then you focus on your breathing and let your exhalation be longer than your inhalation. And we do 3 conscious breaths this way. And then you recognize the exact emotion which is arising in you. Is it anger, frustration, anxiety, or confusion? Or is it joy, gratitude, or love? And then you observe the direction of your thinking. Are you in the past or the future? Or are you in the present? And now visualize or feel a tiny little flame between your eyebrows. And then slowly move that flame into the middle of your brain. And hold the attention on the flame for a few moments. And when you are ready, with your own pace, you may smile and open your eyes. Yeah, thank you so much. I think for me, consciousness is really the most effective catalyst for transformation. And I hope that as many leaders embark on this consciousness growth, because I think humanity is worth of having a future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jan. And I think you are seeing also in the faces of our guests that everyone is actually quite deeply moved and listening in. So this might be a good opportunity to welcome Gitta to our call, who made it. It's great to see you here. Good morning.
Hello guys, good morning. I'm so happy that I can attend. I had a little bumpy ride yesterday caused to allergies, but I'm feeling fine. It was nothing that good cortisone, antihistaminica and good sleep could fix. So Jan, I enjoyed your talk very, very much, and I'm looking forward to hear the ideas of everybody else. Thank you so much.
Exactly.
Thank you, Gitta.
Thank you.
So before we move over to Regina, I just want to send a quick hello to the both Dominics who are again in the chat and who followed all the 48 hours. Hi, Dominic. So, Regina, it's you.
Thank you, Kristin, for handing over to me. So yeah, if we look at our world, Jan introduced us so beautifully, then I think we all agree that we definitely need a change. And I can highly relate to the keynote Jan gave. And yeah, currently we are facing so many crises and challenges. So it seems like wherever we look, there is one. And whether is it yeah, climate, nature, politics, society, economy, education, health, you name it. And from my point of view, all of them are caused by how we human lead in this kind of fields or in these different fields. So for me, leadership in crisis has two meanings. And the first one is leadership itself is in the crisis, because it must be, otherwise we would not face so many challenges, and especially in such a scale. And the second point is we certainly need leadership in a crisis or in the crisis. And this relates more to how leadership should look like or could look like. And I would like to share now with you a couple of slides to share my ideas of what's important and how we could approach it. So just give me a minute. I hope you can see it all. Let me check. Yeah. So yeah, when we work with clients, we often hear our people resist change. But I would like to clarify this, because people do not resist change. What they resist is the transition. And transition is an inner process through which people reorient themselves to do things simply a new way, to learn things, to learn to do things a new way. And every transition involves 3 phases. And the first phase is an ending phase. Here, people have to let go of old ways, old identities, and they have to deal with losses and the corresponding emotions. And these losses can be, for example, turf, roles, status, responsibilities, promotion opportunities, team membership, or sometimes just the familiarity of how things were. And in the second phase, the neutral zone, which is also referred to as emotional wilderness, this is a time, an in-between time, where the old is gone, but the new is not yet fully operational or doesn't feel very comfortable. And it's like literally be between trapezes, so there's nothing to hold on. And in this phase, organizational structures, team structures often break down, and people feel like that they get mixed signals, and they are actually in the unknown and feel very uncomfortable about themselves. At the same time, the neutral zone or wilderness is also a time where the conditions for creativity and innovation are the best, because everything is in the air, and people are in this phase most receptive to experiment and to explore new ways and try out new things, which helps them to reorient, and a reorientation therefore can take place. The third phase is the new beginning. Here people develop a new identity and experience a new energy and discover a new sense of purpose that makes the change begin to work. So what are the challenges then when it comes to transition? So from my point of view, we very often expect people to unplug from an old world and plug into a new world, like crossing the street by the shortest route. But transition takes time, because people have to leave an old identity behind, and they have to explore the unknown to develop a new sense of who they are. And second, leaders often go through a transition themselves, and at the same time they have to support the people to work through the triggered emotions. This can be very overwhelming, and sometimes, or in most cases, we don't get trained in schools, universities, or business schools how to do it. And this brings me to the facet, actually, that if we need a change, then we can say there is no sustainable change without a transition. And in crisis, supporting the transition of people is the primary task of leadership, to turn a breakdown into a breakthrough. So thank you. These were my ideas. Yeah, and I would like to hand over to Kristin.
Thank you, Regina. I give it to Rebekka now.
And it's just my task to pass it on to the next speaker on our line, which would be Marc. And yes, we would love to welcome you to the stage and hear your thoughts and ideas.
Okay, yeah, as I'm an academic, maybe my task is to put a little bit of an academic perspective into this stream. But I'm not a typical academic, as you might have guessed. And so my task, I interpret my task as giving a little bit of a critique of the field of leadership studies as it is right now. And I'd like to stress that leadership studies is a field in which conceptual change is not unusual. We had quite different perspectives on what leadership is in the past. And up to now, there are several, not only several, many hundreds different leadership theories in the field, but there are some core theories discussed until now. But since its beginnings, if you take a historic perspective, we can see that the academic discipline has focused on different main ideas concerning what leadership should be or could be, beginning with doing research on what that leadership could be something like a personal trait of a so-called great man. There are some favorite findings of this perspective concerning, for example, the big 5 personality traits, and in these you can focus on extroversion, for example, as a trait which leaders often have, which has led to suggestions for HR processes to find out extroverted people and bringing them into leadership positions. And this is quite one of the problems we have right now with all those individualistic and very extroverted leaders in leadership positions. And maybe some of the problems we have right now is due to that. Another thing is that there are quite unsharply defined personal traits such as charisma. Nobody really knows what charisma is, but one is searching for a leadership with a high-end charisma, and we have lots of examples in management literature on charismatic leaders. And if we dive a little bit deeper into this, these personalities which are shown there, and these individual examples, we can find in the biographies of them most often quite different traits as well, which might not really relate to the definition of charisma given in the relevant book. Then another thing is we look at, we have looked in the academic tradition on leaders' behavior as a main focus for leadership theories and theorizing. Then we shifted between task-oriented leaders and people-oriented leaders, and really didn't find out which one was better. And we see in this quite one of the first problems we have in our scientific and empiristic view of leadership, because we almost only search for unidirectional and linear cause and effect relations, and this is what is maybe one of the main tasks we have here, to give examples of more complex thought for what is needed in leadership and in leadership studies as well. Next thing would be the leader and follower interaction. We discussed in-group and out-groups of leadership, and to whom the leader primarily relates to. And then we widened the field a little bit to the whole situation as we've told it to be. And at last, we now have some leadership theories focusing on organizational culture, stressing terms like well-being and all the things stemming from positive psychology. And we can find stress-related approaches like mindfulness-based stress reduction approaches in order to make the leader feeling more content with himself, in order to relate better to his employees. But all in all, if we look at the empiric findings, we can say there are weak correlations, but they are still weak. And this is because of the positivistic orientation in our field. We would like to have only one explanatory thing to describe the whole complex issue of leadership, and it should be unidirectionally related to what effects stem from that. Linear cause and effect relations, this is what we are still searching for. Maybe this is the problem we have. But there's some hope in the field as well. We have a field from outside leadership studies. There are some other thoughts drifting into the field of those theoretical approaches. For example, the World Economic Forum report, we can find in there such a statement as, we are in the midst of a profound shift in the context in which leadership takes place and in what it takes to flourish as a leader. And for example, leadership researchers have taken these up, such as Uwe Bien, for example, who states, just as complexity has become an overarching theoretical paradigm in the natural sciences, It is providing the basis for a paradigm shift in the social sciences, particularly in leadership and organizational studies. So there are some trends towards complexity and seeing this as a new direction towards leadership studies. And Senji, for example, very well-known person in this field, he says, ultimately, leadership is about creating new realities, and these should be more complex. So we have this orientation in our field as well. Still, nevertheless, the current challenges to leadership, which are seen in the field, are within organizations as flattened hierarchies, permanent change, increasing employee participation in knowledge, in the knowledge economy. And there are still some external challenges seen as well, such as increasing globalization, rising market dynamics, growing technological dynamics. New to this list is pandemics, of course, and the climate crisis. So we have complex issues at hand. And this is what we have to deal with and where we have to focus our theorizing and empirical research towards. We have some critique of traditional leadership theories in an age of complexity. For example, Ropo and Sauer, they say, we follow the line of thinking that today's organizations operate in complex environments that call for an integrative view of leadership and management. Or Ulbin again, she says, leadership theory has largely focused on leaders, the actions of individuals. It has not examined the dynamic, complex systems and processes that comprise leadership. Because of this, earlier models have been criticized for being incomplete and impractical, with disregard for the essential nature of what leadership is, namely a process. Newer framework models of leadership, they take into account a more systemic approach, and they mostly combine or see three different systems which have to be taken into regard when approaching the leadership phenomenon as a whole, which would be, for example, in the words of McGrath, the self system, the material system, and the social system, which all interact in the leadership process in organizations. Or with Hollander, for example, the leader with his personality is the first system, then the situation, the task, and the environments, and the follower with their values and norms. So we are at the moment approaching a state where we have not only systemic thinking, but also an interdependent systemic thinking in new leadership models. There are a few candidates which could be named here. For example, the expanded leader-follower situation model, which takes into account these three systems, interdependent systems of leader, follower, and situation. And there's even more to that. Not only new leadership models are thinking of these three interrelated systems, but they are ordering some states or stages of development of complexity within all of these three systems. This is, for example, happening within the expanded leader-follower situation model, and there is the cross line of systemic thinking within leadership theorizing, taking into account all of the historic viewpoints, but meshing them together, and the adult development approach within psychology, in which we can find different layers of complexity within tasks the person has to relate to, and the person and the personality, some would say, for example, ego development and their development of the self system. So this is maybe my starting point and what I'm focusing on my research at the moment. Maybe we have some more time to speak about that when we discuss together.
Thank you so much, Marc, for bringing in this scientific viewpoint of leadership research today. And I also loved you were sharing a few words on new leadership models that might be out there that are definitely worthwhile to look up and take a look at. Thank you so much. Next one, I would like to hand over to Nikola, and we are keen to hear your statement and your thoughts.
Thank you. It is a popular belief that science and technology change the world. But I would like to submit to you today that that is not the case. Science and technology simply make things possible, but it is people who actually make things happen. So ultimately, I would argue it is leadership that makes the difference. It is not the science and the technology. So the question naturally then is, what is leadership? And we've been talking about that up until now. So let me share with you my take on it. It's been said that leadership is the ability to motivate, inspire, and impel people to accomplish a certain goal. But I think President Harry Truman defined it even better in saying that leadership is being able to take a group of people in a direction that they are not naturally inclined to go. That is why leadership is the art of influence. But my favorite quote to define, or my favorite way to define a leader is the way that Robert McKee does. And for Robert, a leader is someone who can translate and explain the world to others. And to do that, as Robert McKee points out, we need a story, which is nothing new because as Plato observed 2,400 years ago, the people who tell the stories rule society. So the question then is, what is a story, and why is storytelling the most important skill, in my opinion, that a leader can possess? The great literary critic Kenneth Burke called story an equipment for living, but it was Jeff Deschambault who really brought all the essential elements together in defining story as information processing technology. And that is why Robert McKee notes that story is about trying to make sense of the world, trying to make sense out of the confusion, chaos, and pure terror of being a mortal human being. And as any good tool, we can take that tool and we can apply it to many a problem, which then can help us understand, make sense of, and deal with those problems. So why are stories crucial to leadership? Well, of course, stories give us purpose, they give us context, and they give us meaning. They tell us who we are, they tell us where we're coming from, and they tell us where we're going. They tell us also what we should do, just as well as they tell us what we should not do. And that is why Howard Gardner says that stories constitute the single most powerful weapon in a leader's arsenal. Because no matter what you do, and no matter who you are, if you're actually able to tell a good story, you will be able to move people, you will be able to get people to vote for you, you will be able to raise money, you will be able to sell products, you will be able to change things, and you will be able to make history. And if you look at it historically, every great leader has a great story. For example, if you're Socrates, my favorite guy, your story is, I know that I don't know. If you're Buddha, your story is, life is a suffering. If you're Mohammed, your story is, there is only one God and his name is Allah. If you're Martin Luther in Germany, your story is Reformation. If you're Martin Luther King Jr., your story is, I have a dream. If you're the Beatles, your story is, all you need is love. If you're John Lennon, your story is, imagine all the people. If you're President Kennedy, your story is, we shall put a man on the moon. And if you're Steve Jobs, your story is think different. If you're President Obama, your story is yes, we can. If you're President Trump, your story is let's make America great again. If you're Ted, your story is ideas worth spreading. And if you're this conference that we are here all gathered for today, your story is we need a change. So what does leadership in crisis actually mean? To me, it means that we have to rewrite the story, our story, the human story, because the old stories that brought us thus far are no longer useful. They have lost their vision and grandeur. They've become petty and short-sighted. They're stuck in a past that never was, at the expenditure of a future that can be. Those stories are not simply our history. Those stories are now our chains. And unless we break them, they may become also our death sentence. So if you are a leader, or you aspire to become a leader, the question to ask yourself is this: what is the story I want to tell? Because stories that spread don't just win, they change the world. So yes, we need leadership in this crisis, and yes, we need a change, but I claim to you that what that actually means is that today what we need is a new story, a story that can bring us together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikola. And we would also, of course, be curious to hear if you are Nikola, then your story is. So maybe you could share that later during dialogue. And for now, I would like to hand over to Alina to share her statement with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you also, Nikola, and to all the others who already gave us some inspirations on that. And actually, I can rely and relate to everything that you said. I would just like to add some perspectives on that, and building on creating stories. I believe, or we from the Collective Leadership Institute believe, that it's about co-creating stories with others. And therefore, I would like to share some slides with you. And it's interesting, actually, because I realized that almost every one of us had the same approach of what should I talk about actually here. And we were talking, or we were thinking about the narratives, as Nikola just explained, like we are having different stories. And also in the beginning, when Jan started to explain his perspective, that he also raised two different questions, and the same happened to me actually, because I was thinking about, is leadership actually in crisis, or do we need leadership to get through crisis? And also VUCA was already mentioned, and VUCA, just to rename it, about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And today, or the current situation, is actually a very good example of this VUCA situation that we are placed in. And if we now ask this first question, is leadership actually in crisis? And if we think about our future, what we want to reach, then we can definitely say the former procedure of command and control is definitely in crisis, because therefore you need to understand you cannot control situations, you cannot control processes, you can just create the best, or try to create best circumstances, and give good criteria for situations that are in development throughout the whole time. And controlling is not the attribute that we actually have here, or can afford here. And if we look deeper in the situation right now, is that this situation is characterized by these four attributes, and leaders face the problems of being unfamiliar to the situation, and that there's a lot of information, but in the end, actually, we poorly understand what is actually happening right now, what is the right answer to our questions, and this leads to high level of insecurity also. And taking the situation right now is, for example, staff members, they are now in short-time work or in home office remote work. This is, I think, a situation that a lot of us are facing right now. And if we are looking at the leadership style of command and control, this is a very difficult situation, or which they are facing, because their position or perspective or their narrative is the increasement of employee efficiency. And this is actually something that we cannot control in this moment when people are not in my visual field, or I cannot control what they're doing. And out of a sudden, I'm cut off of my staff members, and mistrust and separation is increasing. So, and this mistrust is even, let's say, getting very active in the way of spyware, malware, tracking functions in your computers, which I recently just read several articles in the financial sector, but also economic sector, and also increasingly in other sectors, that people realize, or staff members realize, that they have some kind of tracking apps and malwares on their computers, so that their leaders can track if they're actually doing the work or not, or if they are leaving the place, if they're writing emails or something else to other people than it was actually supposed to. And of course, on the other side, the staff members either realizing it, or they know it from the beginning, but in the end, this leads to a mistrust on the other side. So we have mistrust on both sides, and this leads to big separations. This leads to a decrease of communication, of collaboration, of commitment, of ownership. In the end, of the productivity, the question of, what am I doing here? Is this really meaningful to me? And definitely aliveness. So actually, the approach of command and control is actually getting to the point of what they were actually fearing of. So there are difficult situations to increase productivity and employee efficiency, and with this approach, it's actually not possible to reach this aliveness stage. And if we are now looking at the second question, is leadership helping us to get through crisis? And now we realized, okay, the former approach of command and control is not helping us, but what else do we have here? We envision once again the future that we want to create. We have different styles, as Professor Lucas just said. He named several approaches of leadership, and I also just want to give a very short overview. We have, on the one side, we have a visionary leadership approach. We have servant leadership approach. We have relational leadership approach, agile leadership, complex adaptive leadership. So there are several new approaches, and we also have collective leadership approach, which is my main part, let's say it like that. And in the end, you can actually say that all these different kind of leadership approaches, they have several things in common. It's about the understanding that it's not the ego perspective. So it's not possible for one person to know everything, to decide correctly, or to decide in the best way that community needs. And the understanding of iterative learning. It's not about making mistakes, or to say you're right and you're wrong. It's about an understanding that we are getting through this process and learning instantly, and learning more through evaluation of our steps that we did. And we will not do the same things again when we realize it didn't work out as we wanted to. And now, if we focus on collective leadership approach, our understanding of the collective leadership approach is that it is the capacity of a collective, so a group of actors, a smaller group or a bigger group, depending on the systems you're acting in. Either it's a system within your organization as a team, or between different organizations and institutions, but also systems that are much larger between countries or geographical distances. And these capacity of a collective, of a group of actors, it is to collaboratively contribute to a shared purpose and to catalyze change towards sustainability transformations. Yeah, put together, in the end, it's actually that we believe that everyone as a person, either you are a formal leader or an informal leader, or you don't even know that you could be a leader. We all have different strengths and competencies. We just need to find out what kind of competency do I have and how can I contribute, so that we understand that we complementary can work together. And this is our major understanding, that it's not only one person who has the lead on the whole time. We are able to understand, okay, this is not my strongest area. I will give my lead to another person, and I then change my role into the follower, let's say it like that. So that there's a constant change in the leading perspective or the narrative, because depending on the expertise of this person. And what is, or leading collectively helps us to build thriving collaboration ecosystems for transforming the future together. What do we mean with collaboration ecosystem? I mean, ecosystem, we know actually, let's say from biology, there is an ecosystem that is like, yeah, interconnected and needs each other to work and to flourish, actually. And this is the same thing that we want to build within collaboration ecosystems, so that people create a flourishing ecosystem where they can work together to really transform something, to really transform into a sustainable future. And this helps us to create human connections. And I think this is also what we understand is most necessary, although in business language, this could be, or this would be named as soft skill, which is actually, from my perspective, not the right wording. It's actually the basis of everything that we want to reach. It invigorates human competences. It shifts thinking patterns, and that's why it's also helpful to restructure interaction patterns. It fosters complementary actions, and it cultivates a spirit of mutual support. It creates a feeling of aliveness, and it enhances vitality and resilience. And the last three words are actually, for me, very important, because as I just said, with the human connections, like soft skills, aliveness, vitality, and resilience are actually the driving forces behind every group that wants to change something. If you imagine a situation where collaboration was so easy and it was just fun, yeah, if you just remember the situation, like with 3 or 5 colleagues working on a specific project, and you had the feeling, actually, we just had several conversations and out of a sudden everything was done. So the feeling of joy, the feeling of aliveness, and it was just, it felt easy to really work on this project or in a complex challenge. This is something that we need to increase the level of aliveness, the level of vitality, and the level of resilience. And the question is now, how? I mean, how can we do that? And it sounds pretty clear, and I think every one of us understands what this means, but how can we bring it really into reality on operational level, where people really can find their activities as a next step? And therefore, Dr. Petra Kunkel, who was also speaking on Friday already, she created the compass for people who lead collectively, with 6 dimensions. And these 6 dimensions actually are in close relation to each other. It means that every one of us has these competences. So every one of us has these 6 competences within us. It's just in a different constellation that we that are differently distributed within us. And the questions that could help us to find new narratives, depending on the situation, depending on the challenge, are actually the guiding questions that we need to co-create a story together. This is where I relate to Nikola in this point. And if we think about future possibilities, the question could be, what inspires us to shape a sustainable future collectively? And it's not only my narrative who's necessary, but also the narrative of my core group who wants to change something, because there are different perspectives, maybe even perspectives that I never thought of. And this is very interesting and very important to drive the change. In engagement, we could ask the question, how can we engage those who need to be involved in our collaboration? Because we understand the bigger or the more complex a challenge is, the more people we need to involve, because we need more and different perspectives. But how can we involve these people actually? And therefore, we need also to understand what kind of perspective do these people have to find a real, a good argument and a good base for dialogue where we can invite other people to. In innovation, the question could be, what innovative approaches exist or need to be fostered for a sustainable future? It's not only about innovation itself, but about innovation for a sustainable future. So everything that we are developing or reinventing or inventing should be focused on sustainability, and not only just not just innovation, but a sustainable innovation. In humanity, we can ask the question, how can we touch people's hearts and create meaning? And I think this is actually the most important point. How can we create emotionally compelling goals so that people feel attracted by that and can also really find their intrinsic motivation to support us or to create their own initiatives for sustainable transformation? In collective intelligence, we can ask the question, how can we leverage diverse perspectives, expertise, and competencies? So we need to understand what kind of circumstances do we need to create for people to feel comfortable so that they can really, really bring in their perspectives, expertises, and their competencies. And in wholeness, it's about the question, how can our work contribute to a larger sustainability narrative and connect global with local responsibility? So we need to understand that as an individual, but also as collectives, we are let's say, transmitter between global responsibility, but also local responsibility. And I think this is something that a lot of people are not familiar with, or do not understand fully yet. But it could be helpful to bring this understanding into their consciousness. And sorry, once again, so we have this overview of the compass that can help us to guide through difficult situations. And but now it is about talking. It's about creating a dialogue, and it's not about debating. It's not about negotiations, because this is an understanding of someone wins and someone loses. This is not what we want. We want to have a win-win-win-win-win situation. And therefore, it is important to create or to increase our dialogic skills.
Absolutely. And Alina, could I kindly ask you to come to an end?
Yes, okay, I'm coming to an end. The last slide here. Develop the dialogic practices. It's based or adapted from Bill Isaacs. It's about that we need to understand, am I strong at voice, at listen? Am I strong in respecting others? Am I strong in suspending my judgment? We cannot be strong everywhere, but we need to understand, where is my preference? Where is my preference position? Am I strong at voice, or am I helping other people to find their voices? Or can I see in the process that I needed, there are some gaps where I need to intervene and to find people who are strong in these fields. And the major learning here is, and this is like for all approaches, this is the major learning from my perspective. We need to find our the strong self, the inner journey. How can we approach our inner journey as a leading collectively in the system? What else is around us? So what helps collaboration ecosystems to become effective and efficient? And the last question is, in process, so how can we design principles for process? What are the most effective ways to design collaborative, transformative change processes? So in these three levels, we need to develop our understanding. How am I contributing as an individual to the system, and what is the process in between, and how can I invite other people to support me in this system, in this process. That's from my side, and I will stop my presentation.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Alina. And I think it can absolutely be safe to say that we need a change is actually a collective leadership approach, or the ask for a collective leadership approach by FORMWELT Institute. And to bring all these wonderful people here together in able dialogue, contribute to a shared purpose in the end, and complementary work together. And that's also why we are taking a focus on all of you having their say in their space today. And that's how I would like to hand over to Heiko to also share his view and his opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Whoa, that's rich. I would really love to dive into each perspective for hours and hours and hours and nights and weeks and months and whatever, but I don't have so much time here now. So, I hope that I share, yes, okay. When I was listening to all of you, I was thinking, okay, will that what I have prepared match? And I decided, maybe not. So, what I've heard and what fits to my point of view, I will just reflect back. So this is not meant as a synthesis, but more as my perspective that was somehow in resonance with what you all shared. And Marc said leadership, to see leadership as a process was one of his many statements. And I would like to add to provide orientation. And we've heard about the relevance of consciousness. And we had this wonderful little exercise. And I would just like to add a little exercise and a little experience for all of you. If it's possible for you, just stand up. And you can do this on the screen, try it. And stand like Charlie Brown stands. Perhaps you know this, the shoulders to the lower part, the head down, looking at your feet. And say something like, I'm so happy. That doesn't really work. And if you stand up, raise your hand, look to the sky or the ceiling, wherever you are, and say, oh, I'm so depressed, everything is a mess. My assumption is that won't work. Not really. And this is, if we're talking about consciousness, and from my point of view, this is not what you said, Jan, but I just want to emphasize this. We are often taught, we always have to think about our body. If consciousness is not embodied, we can't use it in that situation where we need it because we are more in a stress state. So we really have to see what is with our body. And there we are talking about collective trauma, individual trauma, all the little traumatic experiences that some people call education or something like that. Because of course, often we are not trained enough to really know what happens in mind and body and so on. And we heard about this inner transition and that we are often not trained enough. How do we deal with all the uncertainty within us? And sometimes I would say if we are talking about a crisis, we don't have a crisis out there, we have a crisis within us. Because we are not able to do a natural response, a real, alive, natural response, what is in somehow adaptation to whatever question the life asks us, like climate change. And so we are really separating something within us, because if we would really allow us to be touched and really be moved. And this is not only thinking, this is really feeling, deep feeling in our bodies, and really feeling the pain and the suffering in the world. If you stand in a German forest and you're really taking a deep breath and really deeply sense into the forest, then, at least from my point of view, tears come up, because our forest is not in a very good situation, and the whole world is not a very good situation. And as Nikola said, this comes from certain stories we are telling, certain narratives we have. If I'm hearing this statement, we have to go back to nature. Yes, maybe, but what we are doing in that moment is we separate ourselves from nature. We are nature. Nature is within us. So how do we get to alive responses? Oops. And we had a lot of talking about co-creation. And how can we do real co-creation by listening to each other, by talking to each other, and really creating some kind of action. So it's not only about providing orientation, it is also about really doing something. And this is where we often need our bodies to do something in real life. So sometimes I'm questioning myself, do we really have a crisis? And we can call this crisis because, of course, it's a mess out there. But do we really have a crisis? And if we have a crisis, what is the crisis we have? And from my point of view, the crisis is that we've lost our vitality, our aliveness. We are stuck in automated reactions that are often nurtured by the narratives of the society. You're a good boy or a good girl if you take your goals and achieve your stuff and you buy your house or whatever. And if you're dancing through the woods, everyone thinks a little bit, what strange person is that? Perhaps this person needs some pills. And late adult development stages sometimes have similar experiences, like people that are sedated with pills, let me say like this. So not always something that looks pretty weird from the outside is crazy from the inside. Sometimes it's just the expression of aliveness and of more complexity and more being natural. We are not so controllable objects as we sometimes think we are nature, so we are alive. So my story, my take, my idea is, we've heard so much about leadership, and thank you all for sharing. And I have nothing heard where I could say, oh, I have a totally different position, perspective on this. And I just want to add this: for collective collaboration, we need our individual aliveness. We have to reconnect to the basic embodied experience we all share when we were in the womb. In the womb, we were connected and nurtured. And this can be recreated by relationships and deep dialogue. Sometimes meditation, being reconnected to the oneness, perhaps. And we have experienced growth, and not in terms of numbers and figures and Excel sheets, but of real thriving and growing. And we had boundaries around us that protected us. And at some point, we had to overcome and transcend into a new world and overcome these boundaries. And this was called birth. From the other side, I don't know what it's called from the inside. Perhaps it's called death or crisis or whatever. So these are just my thoughts, ideas, movements, whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heiko, for actually sharing, as it felt like, from your deepest heart with us, your thoughts on the talk so far. And I am absolutely with you when you say consciousness needs to be embodied, which I think is even much more a challenge now that we are working in such a virtualized world, where even real interactions are also intermittent much more than before. So that could also be interesting to talk about later in our open round. Last but not least, before we all go to a little comfort break, I would like to ask Gitta to invite her to the stage, and she wanted to address you all with a little statement as well. But you are still mute.
Yes. Can you leave the speaker view? I do not wish to be the only one seen here, because I want to address everybody and try some summary and some ideas I had while listening to you. This what is happening here is more like a puzzle. Yeah, everybody delivers another important aspect about what we are thinking about. It's a systemic puzzle. I put on some notes with handwriting. I hope I can read it. Did you recognize how seldom we write with our hands today? Yeah. Okay, Jan, I was deeply impressed by the moment you said consciousness we can only change on an individual level. I want to add the idea here that the problem with this approach is you can only approach the individual. Yeah, so you have to talk to groups, you have to talk to people, you have to address a broader public, whatever. I think when we add language here as a bridge and as a medium, we can work on a broader range. Yeah, that is something I think we can put into the discussion later. Yeah, to give a little bit more, a deeper perspective for what you have talked about, especially in context of vertical development. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, super. Okay, Regina, I loved your reference on transition. That is almost exactly my reference on crisis. Yes, crisis as a concept that means chance, challenge, yeah, not only danger and risk, etc. You said transition is an inner process through which people reorient themselves to do things in a new way. And that is the very function of crisis. Yeah, beautiful, wonderful. Thank you very much. Marc, you said, and I totally agree, complexity is the new paradigm, not only in hard sciences, but in soft sciences and leadership as well. And you added the latest development and systems thinking and interdependent systemic thinking and interdependent systemic leadership. Leadership means, you said, orientation. Leadership means orientation. That is what you said, and Heiko referred to it as well. I think we can think about leadership by conflict. Understanding conflict as a creative process helps systems to differentiate themselves. So we can put out the negative aspects of conflict by pointing out to the people we work with and to ourselves that conflict has an differentiating function in every autopoietic system. It's just the question of how we approach the conflict. That was an idea here. Nikola loved the aspect storytelling very, very much. I thought about my story there and thought about everybody is super intelligent, beautiful, and co-creative. And then I asked myself, you said a story that can bring us together. What if that's the story we should tell? So we do not tell a story for everybody, but motivate The people we work with, ourselves, families, partners, etc., maybe that could be the story that we all need, a story that can bring us together. Does that make sense?
Well, the story gives you the why. Just like Friedrich Nietzsche said, give a person a sufficiently powerful why, and he will be able to endure anyhow.
Yeah.
So the story tells you why. And if you don't have, and that's where I want to take, but that we'll do later on in the discussion, some kind of pour oil into the fire on the discussion here. But to me, all of that vitality, energy, etc., comes from the story. Because you can have a very depressed person or apathetic person, and that doesn't mean that they're depressed or apathetic per se necessarily. They may be, but they may not be. But that means mostly you have told a poor story.
Yeah.
Because if you tell them a strong, powerful enough story, they will get the vitality, the energy, and they will do anything necessary. You don't need to tell them how to do it. You just tell them why. They would figure out the how. And that's why the story is such an engine.
I understand. What I meant is I can deliver the question to everybody what the story can be that can bring us together at the story I am telling.
Yes, I got that, but I think we must do better. Because, and here's how you know if it works. Here's how you know. Here's the litmus test, right? Go and meet someone on the street, and this is how you measure it. You don't measure a story by whether somebody buys your product, for example, because this is classic management theory. Did the person buy your product? That means they believe your story. I say that's the very basic level. A better level is very simply measured like this. Is it the case that as soon as you tell that person that story, they're so amazed and so moved by it that they immediately want to turn around and tell that same story to somebody else? Because that means the story is infectious, it's viral, and that's how it spreads like a wildfire. This is how religion spreads, this is how all ideology spreads. This is true of Brexit, of feminism, of Trumpism, of anything that you want. And so is this story that you're proposing now, if you meet a person you don't know, you've never met, and you tell them this, is that going to be strong enough to move them so much that they would want to tell that idea to the next person they meet?
I understand. Thank you. The approach I have here is the very idea Marc presented and Heiko took on. This is not something we do not agree. Yeah. But I put my ideas here in. I don't think that we can concentrate leadership on one person or one group, etc. I think the moment we understand that leadership actually is a function for orientation, we talk with everybody. Yeah, everybody, because when we have a team and someone has built something and want to make others understand what he, she has built, this is orientation, what is happening there. So everybody needs leadership skills in one or the other way. That was my systemic point I wanted to bring in here. Alina, you brought the important topic of mistrust into the discussion. I want to address the problem with trust. Trust is paradox. So maybe we can think about, now I cannot read my own hand, how mistrust, how we can communicate mistrust and trust as a paradox that can motivate creativity. Every paradox has an X-differentiating function on systems. Yeah, when you're confronted with trust, the moment people ask for trust, the moment mistrust is on the table. Yeah, that is something that is happening every time. So trust can, the formal discussion about trust can become something that helps teams to build trust. Yeah, concerning your 6 competences, our idea was to support these 6 competences by co-creating the story together. through clear and supportive language that motivates emancipation on all levels of interaction and all levels of consciousness. Yeah, that was an idea I had. Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. And Heiko, I want to motivate the idea about not only storytelling, but story doing. Yeah, how can we do that? Yeah, what does story doing means? It's a concept I was confronted with by Herbert Exner, who I'm very sorry is not here today. I really forgot to invite him. Okay, something like that happens every day. But I will definitely talk to him again. Story doing, that might be also an important thing we can think about later. Thank you all very much. Did I forget anyone? No, I did not. Wonderful. Thank you. Now there is a break, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gitta. And you put already so many fruitful thoughts in the in our panel. So everybody can think about that for 10 minutes. See you back at 10:50 after a break for fruitful dialogue then.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So I think everybody is back now, and Gitta will join as well. So maybe we give her another minute. Ah, there she is. Great. Welcome, Gitta.
Yeah, sorry for being late. I put something in the chat. Maybe that's interesting, and we can think about that too.
Yeah, of course we can. We have now another more than 1 hour to speak about different perspectives. And I want to turn over to Rebekka because she wants to moderate in the second half.
Absolutely. So now we are coming to the open part of the discussion where every one of you has the opportunity to speak up, interact with each other. What we are looking for is a dialogue between you. So try to keep yourself concise and also try to pick up on what the others are saying, working with each other here. We will do it in a way that we work with hand raises, either that you just show us your hand very quickly or that you use the functionality in Zoom. And then we can always give the word to one or the other of you. During the break, Nikola has approached us and asked if he could start with the first hand raise to start the conversation. And we said, absolutely, be very welcome, be our guest. And that's where the open dialogue is starting for you right now.
Thank you. You know, I have a big soft spot for ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. And one of my favorite quotes comes from Epictetus. And he says, we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from the stories that we attach to them. And that's how powerful a story is. It's in fact so powerful that it's the most powerful thing that I know of in the world. And I discovered that very crucially when I was 19 years old. I was conscripted against my will to go to the Bulgarian army. And I was facing the situation where I didn't want to be there. All the people around me did not want to be there. And yet we had the choice to go to jail or to go to the army. And not only that, but you have to do and accomplish certain things and certain tasks which can involve life and death situations. And what I discovered there is that the way that you make or help people follow you is with a story. You have to give them the why. And if you give them a strong enough why, people would kill and will die for you. And it doesn't matter if it's true or false, unfortunately, or not. It doesn't matter if it's real or fake. And we can see that all around the world. What are the most powerful things in the world? You see, our fictive language has given birth to stories. So much so that today, imagined and real stories are more powerful than anything else. So today, trees, rivers, fish, animals, even the climate depend entirely on constructs that we have invented that do not exist for their future survival. So there is no such thing as money, law, justice, human rights, religion, love, friendship, capitalism, corporations, nations, or humanity outside of our human imagination. Those are all stories that humanity told ourselves. And now those stories are so powerful that they will determine the fate of the real world, ourselves included. They will decide if the rivers would survive, the fish would survive, if we would survive. Because the stories are what we kill and die for. And for example, let's just stop here and ask for feedback. Do you agree? Do you not agree? And does that make sense to you? Because everything that comes as what Gitta calls ideology is a story. That's true of Christianity, capitalism, Islam, feminism, Brexit, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matters. Anything that you want like that is a story.
Great. Heiko was already the first wanting to give feedback.
Yes, and I would make a little distinction. First off, I would say, yes, that's totally true. And we really have to create another story where we are really reconnecting to a more natural and not such an artificial life. So we get more close to a thriving world and see ourselves connected and being with nature and not needing more than one world per year, basically. And the other thing I want, and that's more the collective way we have to take, but there's another approach that we should also take, and that's the individual development. And I see this as vertical development, seeing more and more perspectives, adult development and so on, but also getting rid of the individual traumas that were caused by the narratives of the general society. So this is more or less three approaches. We have to do this collective approach. What do we really want to go to? And we need an individual approach in terms of healing or getting more healthy, getting rid of the damages the former stories already created in each of us, and growing our consciousness into a wider and wider perspective. And given the numbers I'm aware, but perhaps Marc, you know more about that because you have a broader academic point of view. But if I'm looking at the figures around adult development, and I'm a scholar of adult development, so I know them pretty good, then I don't believe that we will be so quick in developing people into a stage that we do not need this manipulative stories. Because at certain stages, you need this input from the outside.
Thank you very much, Heiko. So the next hand I saw is Marc. You have to unmute.
And by the way, you can also self-organize to a certain degree, please. Just if we have too many hands rising.
My input would be behind every good story, there is a concise set of values or a value system, which people can relate to. There's one option for that for us, looking at the sorry, this was a phone call. There's one option for us. What we could do is diving a little bit into adult development theories, for example, on value development, and have a clearer look at which are the main values at hand, which could be addressed and relate to the state of complexity we have in our world and with issues at hand. This is the first thing. But what I would like to remind us all of as well is, as Heiko already mentioned, it's not storytelling has a huge problem with it. It can be used manipulative, and I think what we would most need is authenticity in this whole approach. And this is a major theme for leadership as well. Leaders would have to be, and hopefully are, as they are developed a little bit further on a vertical developmental dimension. They would have to be authentic with what they do. They can express their knowledge and their complexity, and maybe they would be difficult to understand for people they interact with, but they still would have to be authentic and not manipulative to put people into places they might not want to be. And we experience that so often within organizations as well within the spiritual scene, that maybe people start with good intentions, but still they are manipulative in order to come to the solutions they first wanted to come to. So be more open-minded with your stories. Make open, tell open stories with an open ending, with which people can relate in their own way. They can find their values within that and can create their own, make their own story out of this and find their own solution. This would be my suggestion. And so one final word. I had a discussion with a tree several years ago. I was going into the woods, and I had at that moment I was already into adult development, but at a very early stage. And I was thinking about, I had a growth mindset. I was always thinking about adult development is growing, and I would like to be the best one in this adult development, and most adult and most complex person. And then I spoke to the tree, and it was spring, and I said, "Oh, it's spring, tree. Now you are growing. Isn't that great?" And it was some kind of an, if you're into that orange movement. And the tree told me literally as a reply, he said, "Marc, it's not about growth for me, it's about flourishing. And development can also be flourishing and not growing." And this is, I think, one of the things we would need right now with our development in several contexts within the business world as well.
Thank you very much, Marc, for the nice picture with the tree. So before Gitta and Jan, who both raised their hands, I want to pick up the question Heiko put in the chat, because Marc, maybe you can respond directly on it. So Heiko asked, what is your reference of authenticity in this case? What do you mean by authentic?
Okay, there's a lot of literature on authenticity in the organizational psychology theorizing and leadership theorizing. And
what is it for you?
Authenticity would be to be in line with what's one's own core of values, for example. To not be manipulative, to be open-minded towards the differences that are in the world and the different contributions people can make and bring to the world. And that's part of being authentic, showing up, but not wanting to make people relate to you in a way you want to pre-shape.
So, Gitta.
Thank you very much, Marc. Love it. Thank you, Heiko. That was exactly what I was about to ask Marc. Because authenticity can come with problems. Complexity means we have to deal with the undetermined every day. And that means we are surprising ourselves every day. There is no such thing as a closed person. And that means we contradict ourselves, we are in conflict with ourselves. So I used the word truthfulness here, or satyagraha from Mohandas Gandhi as the accordance of thinking, speaking, and acting. But it's really a complicated thing, and I never saw anyone who can actually do that every single day. Yeah, so I think we should take this into accordance. Is that the right word? I'm sometimes lack English concepts. I'm very sorry.
Consideration.
Yeah, consideration. That's it. Yeah, writing is something else than speaking. Yeah, when you're not used to. And that, yeah. That was one thing. The other was, I put it for all in the chat, but Rebekka reminded me that the audience cannot see it. Every competence is competence in sign processing. And at the very core of every change is sign competence, including conscious storytelling. Now, I think that is important to relate to. Because when we try to construct conscious storytelling, we have to consider that that can go out of hand, that people will react to it, etc. So we need some reference system that helps others to comprehend what we are really talking about. At the moment, organizations put on some memes for people we trust in or whatever. We know this is an organization in deep conflict. Yeah, I think you all have experienced that. Yeah, okay, thank you.
So first Jan and then Nikola.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you to all the inputs, and thank you, Nikola, for bringing up the topic and sharing the wonderful examples. I love that. The storytelling for me is more a vehicle or a tool to generate, as you said, this kind of energy and the followers and direct them or orient them. So for me, the more driving is that also what Marc said is the intention behind it. Yeah. So what's the intention of why you create that story? And I think even here, if you are an authentic, let's say, guy who, I don't think there are bad guys out there, they just have a different value system and they just think from their perspective they have the right to do this. So they would be authentic and then they would create a story for other followers to do whatever is necessary there. So even authentic doesn't do it for me. So for me, it's really again about the intention, and that's coming back to consciousness again. What state am I? What I'm trying to intend? What kind of worldview do I have?
Okay, so I'm afraid we're kind of overcomplicating things a little too much here, perhaps, right? So if we can't put things into a succinct way, because we are talking here about leadership, and leadership is, I think, yes, culture is important, but actually a leader or leadership causes a cultural shift. So you can say, well, here's the values that reflect that story, and you have to tell a story which reflect these values. And I would say that's not a very good story. That's not a very original story. That's a story that causes no shift, no change. A leader stands outside of the value context or a little bit ahead of it, a little bit ahead of culture, and causes a ripple effect all throughout the value system, which then forces the whole value system to shift into alignment with that leader and with that story. And that is why, for example, President Truman used to say that leadership is about taking people to a place that couldn't have gone or reached on their own. Right? This is the art of leadership. This is the art of influence. And of course, you can take a fake story. You can tell an inauthentic story. And by the way, authenticity is very simple to me. It's living your message. You don't live your message, you're not authentic. Right? It's very, very simple. That's what Socrates did. That's why he was authentic. The people who are leaders who can move people are people who are the physical, very often, embodiment of their message. And whether it's good or not, and we can talk about the distinction between good leaders and bad leaders, and talk about then what's the intention. Are they tricking people? Are they lying to them just to get personal benefit? And we can say, well, that's bad leadership. But still, they're using the same tool, which is a story. And so you can have President Trump, who came up with a story, let's make America great again. It's entirely fabricated story. It's a story that tells us to go back to a golden past that never existed. But for good or for bad, most people believe him, or enough people believe him to make that cultural shift. Any religion in the world, whether Christianity, whether Islam, whether Buddhism, did the same thing. It didn't happen. Jesus, as far as I'm concerned, I saw no evidence that Jesus came out of the grave, right? I wasn't there. There's no physical evidence it actually happened. But that story spread like wildfire, and it changed the lives of millions and billions of people. And it's a fake story, in my opinion, right? So, and when a lawyer comes and says, I proclaim you, or a judge says, I proclaim you for a husband and wife, it's a legal fiction. He didn't, and that's going back to the point where the story of doing and saying, there's not much difference quite often. Saying the story is doing the story. When a judge writes a legal paper that says, your corporation now exists, what did he make to make that happen? Nothing. He just made a proclamation. I proclaim you husband and wife. It's a legal fiction. It doesn't exist. It's a story that we embrace for true.
Thank you, Nikola. So we have many hands up now. Alina was the next. I hope this will work to take care of each other's thoughts. And Alina.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was collecting some ideas, and the first thing that came into my mind when we were talking about stories or dialogue, it's the idea of or being able to code and decode. So it means that we need to be at the same level of literacy level of understanding, and what is maybe also a major shift now, or what we need to somehow reach, is a shift into a transformative literacy, so that people actually understand what we talk with each other, because we know that language can be language can help us, but also is a very, very big filter for, I mean, we are, like, most of us are here German speakers, now we speak in English, and it's already some kind of a filter in here. And also for people who are speaking another language and also additional English, there's already a second filter in it. Yeah, so we need to be sure that we can code and decode the same meaning here. And that's why I would also move maybe into a direction of how can we increase the level of transformative literacy, so that we understand similar things. But behind that, we need to understand that, and this is also, I think Nikola mentioned already, that we all have different approaches to change, or different worldviews. I think, yeah, Ken Wilber created this theory of change, and in the end, actually, we need to understand that we are all differently socialized. We were all differently raised. We have different movements in our background. We know different things. We have different experiences. And are we actually understanding each other? In the end, we need to ask this question. And maybe it's interesting if we tell a story, or if we want to co-create stories with others, to first at least shortly to understand what is the world view that I'm coming from. And this is actually a thing that we never use. It's not something that I come into the room and tell you, yeah, I was born in Kazakhstan, and with 5 years I moved to Germany, and I live, like, let's say, 2 nationalities. I'm German, but at the same time I'm also a Russian person, or from post-Soviet society formed. So that's why I have already different perspectives. Nobody knows that, but I think maybe it's also interesting to give some background information, so that people can follow what is the worldview you're actually looking through as a filter. And this can maybe help also to increase the level of reconciliation. And I think this is why we also need stories to focus on people that actually what do we want to reach in dialogue? We want to have a purpose. We want to have increase the aliveness. And I think for this, we also need to look at what is this healing this person needs, maybe, yeah? Like, as Heiko said, there is a specific purpose that we want to exchange about a topic, or exchange about a different and very complex challenge that we are facing. And because we are coming from different worldviews, maybe it's also important to think about how can we first do the step of healing between each other, and what can increase the level of reconciliation. And in regard, this is my last point, in regard to alignment, I'm a little bit volatile here, because alignment for me is not necessary for a movement, or for for a movement, let's say it like that, or for leading people in the direction. Although I believe in collective leadership, I do not believe in alignment. It's not necessary to have alignment. It's necessary to have an ongoing conversation, to have an ongoing dialogue, and at least we need to understand the purpose altogether. And this is definitely, Nikola, what you said also, and all the others. We need to understand what's the alignment, but I can also have other goals that can lead to this purpose than another person, and we don't need to align in our sub goals, let's say like that. In the end, it's important that if one person, let's say, wins, it automatically leads to another person who's also winning, you know, in this process of following the purpose. And I don't believe that alignment is necessary. It's sometimes even necessary to have some contradictory meanings or understandings here. And yeah, that's my input for now.
Thank you very much, Alina. So the purpose of this panel at the moment is to bring together all the perspectives. If they're contradictory or not, it doesn't matter. So Heiko, your hand was raised next.
So many fast movements, what direction to take. So I think we have to accept that we are individual meaning-making animals. And this is individual meaning-making, just as Alina said, based on our worldview, our background, our stage, our whatever. And our meaning-making is often based upon stories that are completely illusionary or fictional, like Nikola said. And if I am thinking about change and leadership, then I think about movement into some kind of direction. And because we are all individual meaning-making animals, we need constant dialogue for this. This is a process orientation that Alina talked about from my point of view. And if I'm thinking about, beside individual development, what stories do we have to build? I don't believe that the energy comes with the story. The energy is there, is in the person, and the only question is, can I really connect and somehow channel this energy into any direction? And from my point of view, there are just two basic hooking points or forces or whatever. We can have passion or suffering. So every story, whether it's a Darth Vader story or any other politician I don't want to mention here, story that is more leading into, I really love, Nikola, what you said, into a golden age that never existed. This hooks at some kind of suffering or passion. And the interesting question, if we're thinking about leadership in organizations, or if we think it really big in terms of climate change, and this is what we are talking about, what is the suffering or the passion that we can address to really create movement on a larger level? And trauma is one way to get rid of suffering by just not feeling it. So And I don't believe that we can heal all the traumas in the world and then be happy. We have to go on, otherwise there won't be humanity on this planet. So that will solve the trauma issue too. But so what are the passions or the sufferings that we can really use to create a future that we want, thriving, flourishing for
But the point I was
all?
making though, and that's what Epictetus was stressing, is that those passions, that suffering, those are the two stories. They don't exist. So what you would describe as suffering is someone's passion. And it's 100% a story. Events happen. They're entirely independent. The meaning that you attach to that event, the meaning that tells you if this event is a positive or a negative, if it is a suffering or a reward, is a story. So if you're already starting with that point, you have it upside down, right? You want to shift that. So let's say an event happens. My best friend dies. And you say, oh, Nikola, I feel so much suffering for you. Your best friend just died. And I say, well, here's the thing. My best friend suffered from a terrible degenerative disease. And he suffered terribly for the last 10 years of his life. He lost all of his physical function. He was losing all of his mental function. And it was absolute suffering to watch him and for the people around him. So he was relieved when actually in the end he was able to choose his death, his time, and the manner that he went to. And he was very happy that it happened like this. And it was a celebration. It was a celebration of his life. And it was a very positive experience out of a very negative thing. And this is what the ancients were talking about, that things like life and death, they're not necessarily good or bad. But just like Shakespeare said, there's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. And that's the story you slap on that thing. And that's we can talk about what's a good story and what's a bad story, what's a positive and negative, but it's always a story. You know, whether you're a German, we are talking about diversity is a story. Being German is a story. My other best friend came to Germany, became a German. What does it mean? He didn't change anything. He just said, I believe in that story and it's my story now. That's what it means. I came to Canada. I said, I'm Canadian. A judge proclaimed you're Canadian. That means now I believe that story. Nothing changed about me.
But still, in the context of what you right now told us, I might want to give that person a hug instead of telling him a story. And what I ask myself is, maybe there are also some other kinds of communication and relatedness besides of telling stories as well. For example, embodied possibilities of having contact, or as aesthetic dimensions of having contacts. Maybe leadership in this sense could be a kind of a dance as a bodily movement as well. And I would like to have this this idea of and picture of having being related to the person I'm interacting with in a kind of a dance, seeing what the person is up to, where he moves next, and which options we have together to make a move which brings in an aesthetic dimension which helps us both, and not only telling him a story in order to make him go in a direction which I might have as an idea had before. So for me, it's three questions in this. Is a story or whatever kind of relatedness we might engage in, what purpose is it? Has it? Do I want to make one single story in order to reach as many people as possible, or is it something very different? To be open to understand what that person I interact in that moment right now wants. So I have to have very, very specific stories, which I have to shape, not before interacting with that person, but while I interact with that person. This would be my first question. The second would be, are there other dimensions of being related to persons? I think we experience this quite a lot, especially during these pandemic times where we all meet only in Zoom, and we are so tired of that and want to relate to each other in a physical way as well again, because there's a deep longing for being connected in a deeper way and in a physical way as well. And the third question I would like to ask is, what is the purpose of an organization after meeting the basic needs of the organization to survive? Because I don't think that survival needs should be the driving force for organizations. So what purpose do we orient towards if we look at organizations and want to define them, and if we act as leaders in organizations? And final statement, because of the definition of authentic leadership, I looked it up. So as an academic in this position, I have to do that. Lutens and Avolio, they have defined authentic leadership. And but I think it fits in here at the point where we are at right now. They define authentic leadership as a process that draws from both positive psychological capacities and a highly developed organizational context, which results in both greater self-awareness and self-regulated positive behaviors on the part of leaders and associates, fostering positive self-development. I would add adult development towards complexity. And this is, you can find this in balanced work processes, internalized moral standards, transparent working conditions, and self-consciousness. So now we have it.
You know, if I told that's the definition of leadership in front of my platoon of soldiers, they would have shot me on the spot. You know, I'm sorry to say this, but that's a perfect example of overcomplicated things. If we need some academic who in all chances never knew the first thing or had a first experience about what leadership actually means, having to define the vaguest, most abstract idea of leadership, which is totally meaningless to the average person, then we're completely lost. And that connects to, by the way, the previous idea that Alina was bringing about bringing up literacy. I'm all about education and literacy, but a good leader communicates at any and every level, also across time and space, also across cultures. So if you have Christianity, it doesn't matter if you're from Kazakhstan, from Germany, from Canada, if you're in 1 century after AD or 2 century AD. There are people who would live and die by that story, like 1,000 years ago, from any culture, of any educational level. You would have a PhD, you would have a person without education, right? And that's what leadership is about. So let's not overcomplicate. Leadership is about influence. It's about making a difference, making a change. And the more complicated you become, the less influence you're able to do. That's why people underestimated Trump. You know, he lied, he cheated, he invented stuff that never existed, and yet he moved 50 million Americans to vote for him. Why? Because he told them a story they wanted to hear. He changed nothing of the culture. He just took the opportunity to use for personal use and abuse the story and the suffering of those people for his own sake.
And exactly why, that's why he is this. Yeah, but exactly this is why this is a good example for abusive leadership and not good leadership, and of course not authentic leadership. That's it.
That's more of a leadership.
No, sorry, Nikolai, but what your task would be is to develop towards a good understanding of what authentic leadership is, and then translate this into the frame of reference, the people you interact with, whenever you interact with them, but not leaving this state of complexity or this complexity level you reached during your own journey. That's the important thing in that.
So I want to invite Gitta to share her perspective on this theme at the moment, to interrupt this for a moment.
Thank you. I think we have to understand that that leadership and leadership and leadership and leadership and leadership, etc., are not the same. We have to look at the conflicts, we have to look at the system we have, and then we ask what is the orientation function in this specific environment, in this specific organization, etc. If we try to put it on, if we try to only put it in the perspective of a political leader or of a leader in extreme times of crisis, as in war, etc., we have other conflicts, other necessities, other circumstances. So leadership there is something completely different than leadership in an organization that tries to put in values before survival, and then needs to find a way to survive according to these values. That is something completely different. And the real danger here is the moment we put storytelling up front, we can look at the ex-differentiation of this organization as becoming a problem to itself, because then we have to do with story doing, and that is something the whole organization does. It is not the leader, it is the team, it is communication. We are talking about communication here. So leadership is a communication function and not a personal attribute. And leadership is something the whole system defines and not the individual. And that is always happening. So if we are talking about good or bad leadership, we have to look at the conflicts we have, and we have to look at the organization we want to have. And then we have to ask the question, what kind of leadership wants the future from this organization? What kind of conflicts wants the future from this organization? And then we have to construct a form of leadership that is completely conflict orientated. Creative conflicts, monotone conflicts, like in the military, where we have monotone conflicts, yeah, and a very simple dualistic system. But when it comes to new work societies, new organizations that want really to lead into a future that is worth living, we have to take under consideration that we have to deal with systemic problems. And systemic problems tend to get out of control, and that is why we have to redefine leadership there. So I'm done.
Thank you very much, Gitta. And before someone answers, maybe we can include the question out of the chat from one of the Dominics. Imagine we are 50 years in the future, you meet Generation Z or even those with no artificial stamp yet. What will they say we should have done differently?
So, and if I'm taking Gitta's talk at the moment, the question is, what are the conflicts we have to address? And then we can think about which are the good stories to address these conflicts.
Yeah, and one thing, conflicts cannot only be addressed. Conflicts and constructive ways are always cause for other conflicts, etc. That is what is always happening. We cannot put the undetermined into a box and then think everything is done and everything will be fine. That's the best way to self-destruction.
And we can do that. We've proven that often that we can do that, but the results are predictable.
So let me shift the focus here from the military and still sustain that fact with the most anti-military leader in history, and we see if there's actually complete overlap here. So the claim I would like to make is that leaders bring in alignment people, and that's what I meant by alignment, don't align with them. And that's why I told them that leaders take you to a place that originally you didn't even know you want to go, and you didn't have the tools or knowledge to get there. And so far, Gitta's concern is legitimate because all my examples have been given from, let's say, military context. But that's true in most other contexts. Imagine the most anti-military leader in history, Gandhi. Gandhi was living in the context where, as Heiko said, we already had that energy out in the people against British colonialism in India. So there was actually active resistance against the British at a very small scale, and a very large-scale public sentiment against British colonialism. We had the Bengal famine, which killed millions of Indians, and we have centuries of negative feeling towards the British. So just like Jesus, he could have been a rebellion leader. Jesus, theoretically speaking, by the way the Bible is said. He chose not to be a rebellion military leader. He chose something completely different. He chose a path of peaceful disobedience, and he told the story that via peaceful disobedience, he will take down on the British Empire. And when he told that story, Indians and people around the world thought he was utterly crazy, utterly bonkers. How could the British colonial empire be taken down by passive resistance? And not only that, but he would continue that passive peaceful resistance or disobedience until the British, out of their own volition, decided to pick up and leave. Right? Utterly insane, ridiculous, unreasonable idea, an idea that didn't occur to any other of the local leaders. And yet that's exactly what he did. And how he did it? He went to make salt. He made salt and created this huge movement, which took, a few decades, until the point where the British Empire was actually forced to fold their flag and leave on a relatively peaceful basis. The most peaceful, and yes, of course, we had then the dissolution of India between India and Pakistan, and the conflict between Hindus and Muslims, and that's a whole other story. But as far as the British were concerned, they left basically, or he didn't make them leave with an armed resistance. And that's leadership. That's telling that story, what's possible, what could be accomplished in another way that people didn't see as possible before. Because if we are to learn lessons from other anti-colonial movements from Africa and from elsewhere, this usually happened at the points of arms, where the local people rebelled against the colonial powers, and then they pushed them out by force. So to me, that's a perfect example of leadership.
So I really loved your engaged discussion until now. I really want to give the stage to also to Regina, who raised her hand a few minutes before, because I'm a bit concerned about the time. Stream Around the Clock is ending at 12, and I think they will end it and shut down the page. So we have to finish in time today. It's more important than the last days. So Regina, then Alina, and maybe then we start in a final statement round.
I think that storytelling can be a very powerful tool. I absolutely agree with Nikola. I think it's important that you can reach by storytelling people on every layer. I do get that it's a very, very complicated thing if you try to, try to create a story that is inclusive. Because I think whenever you go in a direction, you may not be able to take everyone with you. So there will always be some kind of conflict. I think it's not possible or tensions at least. And I think it's important really to have a good dialogue about it. But I also see it as a very, very powerful tool. So I would not like to say that storytelling isn't a useful tool for leadership, but I very much go by what is the intention behind it, and what is the vision we try to achieve by telling the story, because it's just a tool to get somewhere, because we want to create a change. And to make it accessible for as many people as possible, a good story can definitely help. But I know that the process of getting there is not a quite easy one. So this would be my stand on it. And I think maybe we could more think about, when it comes to storytelling, how can we tell a collective story, a story that is inclusive, that ensures that we have in 50 years a future our children would like to live in. So I think I would rather direct the direction more in what do we want to create, instead of really, you know, of course, ego development plays a role, because people who create stories bring in themselves. So this is something which needs to be monitored. But I think there the collective could help, because you have the collective intelligence and it will check when things might go wrong. So this would be my stand on it. So I hope it makes sense.
So, Alina?
Yeah, I saw this question from YouTube with the imagination of being in 50 years, and someone's asking us what should we have done differently. And actually, I don't want to wait 50 years because this is, I want to have a good future for myself, for my maybe future children, and for my relatives, and for all people. And I have, like, when I do process support in different constellations in different countries, where also conflict is a very big cause why we are talking to the people, in the end, there's mostly, or in most situations, there's a high level of mistrust, and this is like the topic from the beginning. How can we then create a trustful relationship? And I just want to close or come back to the point that Gitta asked in the beginning of how can we actually talk about trust and mistrust to create trust. And I think the most important procedure here is to create a kind of agreement or norms how we want to collaborate. And this helps us to create the basic conditions of being able to listen to each other and see that this person is talking authentically. And because what I realize when I'm in these situations where I do a workshop, for example, where people are coming together from different sectors, so private, public, civil society, academia, but also from different levels, from government, from high level government, national level, regional level, and local level, there is the whole room is loaded with mistrust, and you can really feel it. And the moment, and this is actually the most addictive moment for me, when I'm in this workshop room with these different people who are actually want to really create something differently and in a sustainable future for their nation or for their environment, for their community. But there's this tangible level of mistrust, and you can really feel it. Then I actually talk about love. And I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about human kindness, human love. Why we are here, actually. Why are we taking time to stick in this room and feel these uncomfortable feelings, but actually we want to change something? Why are we investing this? And in this moment, the facial expression is shifting immediately. And the people understand why they are here and why we actually want and need to create a trustful room, because we love our environment in nature, but also in our social interactions. We love our children, our children's children, and we want to create a future for the next generations. And we have the power, and that's why we are here in this room. We have the power to change something, but we didn't focus on it yet. So how can we shift our focus now collectively to feel this human love, this human kindness, to take care of the next steps for the future and empower each other? And in this moment, the energy, as Heiko also said, the energy is there, but we are shifting it immediately into the future perspective, and then depending on which perspective is looking at, the national level, the regional level, the local level, which kind of sector is looking at this purpose, then you have to, let's say, you have to put it down into their conditions, into their circumstances, because they are all experts for their specific circumstances, and they need to break it down. We just need to increase the level of competence that people feel it. We need to open this window because we are all conditioned in being very professional, and in professional life, there's no humanity or less humanity. There's no wording about love, there's nothing like that. But if we really want to increase this moment of looking into the same purpose or similar purpose, then let's open this feeling of I love my people who are around me in the way that I take care of them. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I want to work looking into this purpose and allowing this feeling of humanity. And I think this is also something that I would say to a person in 50 years, but also now. The worst thing that we can do is actually really decline humanity, because in this moment we are not able to create reconciliation, and we are not able to work with others.
Thank you so much, Alina, for giving your statement and also for actually answering the question from the YouTube channel in a very moving and personal way, I feel, which actually almost makes up a beautiful closing statement for the whole session today. But last but not least, we have about 10 minutes left, and we would like to give the opportunity to each of our participants today to share 1 or 2 sentences before we part our ways. The question that we have here for you is, what are you taking away that you did not bring before? As this is a forum about also cross-pollination, learning from each other, we would really like to hear from you. Maybe what is the one thing that is now in your basket you are taking home with you? And please go, whoever likes to go first goes first.
Okay, I start. To me, this was a perfect example for creative conflict. Yeah, Nikola brought up the very important topic of storytelling, and all of us made something out of it that was new, that was beautiful, that was inspired, that does not need it to be calmed down by a common ground or something like that. It was out of respect, yeah, and I loved it.
Thank you, Gitta. Absolutely.
Okay, I'll go next then. So to me, and it's kind of like a call out for help, if you want, a cry out for help. The 20th century was about the clash of 3 stories: fascism, communism, and capitalism. The end of history, as Francis Fukuyama proclaimed it, was the idea that capitalism is not only the best story ever told, but that capitalism was the best story that we could ever tell. The events of the last 2 decades, the beginning of the 21st century, have clearly demonstrated that the story of capitalism has run its course. We need a new story, a story that can unite us, a story can create the context and the clearing within which we can resolve all of our problems, such as climate change, nuclear weapons, you name it, soil erosion, species extinction, plastic pollution, refugee movement, international and interpersonal clash. And all of that, I believe, can be accomplished with a new story, a story that would unite us. And that's the greatest opportunity for leadership in the 21st century. And if I'm to put leadership in one word, that would be the word influence. And if I'm to say what trust is not something that we can ask for. Trust is something we can only earn. And the way we earn it is with authenticity. And authenticity means living your message, means leading from the front, means going to sleep last, means eating last, and means going the extra mile. And if we find that leader who tells that story, I believe we can actually solve those problems. And it doesn't have to be original story. It doesn't have to be their story. It just has to be someone who can tell that story in a powerful enough way to unite us and to motivate us. And unfortunately, so far, I haven't seen that story, and I haven't heard that story, and I haven't seen that leader. And I'm very concerned because we deny the facts and the reality of our challenges because simply they don't fit with our old stories, but we don't have a better alternative yet.
What I have learned from this collective approach is that leadership still has an individual dimension and a collective dimension. And maybe the collective dimension is becoming much more important nowadays than it has been in the past. This also means that leadership might change in the direction that it's not only about telling stories, but maybe in the future more about listening to others' stories. And in this sense, I would say leadership for me, what I go out of this session is with two ideas about leadership. One is leadership of the future, beginning right now, could be to offer one's own personality and foster individual personal development of others. This is the individual dimension. And in a collective dimension, leadership could be some kind of a tactful co-development, which could be in a conversation, but in all kinds of interactions, maybe also in a kind of a dance, a bodily embodied interaction, but which would have to come to kind of solutions which are applicable in the real world. So leadership on this collective dimension would also have to be some kind of prototyping, trying out what helps, what fits, what fosters a development in this sense, which is healthy for individuals, collectives, and the whole world.
Thank you. Whoever would like to speak next, just grab the mic.
I can go next. I'm not so sure if I agree that leadership is all about influence. And I would like to build on what Marc just said, that for the leadership, we need to bring the individual and the collective together. And I think this is exactly where the leader can start, by building just the space or the framework that the people can thrive and unleash their potential and speak up and use the best of the collective intelligence. And I think that's exactly for me where this comes together, because as the leader, you are creating that space, and at the same time, of course, you are contributing because you are part of that system and that space as well. So what I took away from today is really that leadership is still and probably will be a very fragmented topic. Everybody has a different view, but what I also learned is, with all the different views we have here or we presented today, is I think from an energetical level, I think we all still fully agree. We all agree with the stories. We all agree with the collective approach. For me, the question would have more been, what are we doing with it? Yeah, what are we trying to create? But that's maybe something for another time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan. Absolutely. And there will be a continuation. As we know, this has been the first conference of hopefully many to follow.
I take with me a changed quote. Perhaps some of you know Doctor Who, famous, Google it. And Doctor Who says, we are all stories in the end, just make it a good one. And I would like to change this a little bit. We are all stories in the end, so let us make it a good one.
Maybe I can also give my statement here. Yes, Rebekka, you're right. Maybe I should have waiting for some minutes more so that I can bring my final statement now about the human kindness and human love. But yeah, this is my major statement, and this is what I can say that I also feel here now. There's a lot of aliveness in here because we all care about the topic, and we all care about the future of how people can take the most out of it. And I'm totally with Jan. What I take out of here is that we have sometimes slightly different understandings or formulations, but we are pretty close all together. And this is actually also the good thing, that that there are different perspectives, and we need them. I would like to be part of the discussion how to bring it into reality. And I think we can learn much more than from each other. Thank you.
Yeah, what I take away from this round is, or maybe the idea, that I find it's very important that we rehumanize leadership, that we, I think, connect with the people we are leading, that we start a dialogue. And the dialogue is not only talking, but mainly listening, which is a high quality. And the purpose is really to, I think, get to know each other and get to know the different perspectives. But because I think if this space is created and in some way, Jan said it already, contained, so everybody can have a perspective and nothing is, or the dynamics are there that people can have their voice. I think there will emerge something which could be a vision, how to create a story that may lead us into the future. And I think it is all about the vision where we would like to go, but to create or to nurture the ground, we have to have this connection in a field where everybody is involved. And for me, it's really connecting people to create the future together, because I think that's the way it goes. And I think it's the job of leaders to make sure that people connect with each other so that they can go along with each other. So that would be my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Regina. And with this, we are coming also to the end, not only of our session, but also to the end of 48 hours of stream around the clock. We need a change. First conference on that matter. I can personally say I am very humbled by all I have heard over the last 48 hours. It has been an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you. And I feel for me as a facilitator, I am just right where I belong, facilitating dialogue amongst people who are hopefully helping us all to shape the world to a better future. So thank you very much, Gitta, for the invitation. Thank you, Kristin, and also Martin in absence for great teamwork. It has been a pleasure. And with this, before we hand over to Gitta for the last words, also the invitation to Kristin to share her farewell.
Thank you, Rebekka. So I think the next minutes will be very hard to let go the energy I experienced the last 48 hours. Being together with so many inspiring people who all have the same purpose to make something better for the future from now on. So I really, really enjoyed to organize and facilitate this event. And now I really want to bring together the conscious movement with FORMWELT, and there's many, many work to do. So thank you, Gitta, for making this possible. And it's up to you to be the one who closes the conference.
Okay, thank you. Well, this was a treat. Yeah, it was, to me, it was, I said it yesterday or the day before, I could die now. All is good. Yeah, if this would be the moment, I have to synchronize my video again, but if this would be my moment when, my final moment, I would die with the feeling, yes, yeah, that's it. You brought it up, Marc, it's about dancing. all systems self-rhythmatize. That's what we do. And we cannot believe that one conference will change the world, etc. That would be insane. But all of us have created something really, really grand here. And let's stay in contact. Let's create more of this. Yeah, and let's make this an ongoing event of people who actually care. Yeah, that's something I've loved about every conference here. Some put caring, appreciation, love, etc. in front. Some talked about ethics, others talked about accelerating thinking, and so on and so on. But everybody cared. Yeah, and that is something we really know about almost every single one on this planet. We all care and we all wish for a better future, and that is what we are trying to do here. So let's go on. Let's jazz. Thank you very, very much. I wish you all the most beautiful Sunday of all.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So bye.
Bye.
Thank you for holding the space here. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Yes.
Jan. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.